All right, everyone, thank you very much for joining us today. We will be getting started here in one moment. If you do have any questions, make sure you type those in to the the chat box, as I will be moderating those questions as they come up. So just type them in, then I will interject them in as Tony is presenting. Again, if you do have any questions, make sure they're typed in. We'll give it a few more moments to let some people continue to filter in here, and then we will go ahead and get started. All right, we're just clicking over the 12 o'clock hour, so we will go ahead and get started. We'd like to welcome everyone here to the presentation today, as well as our guest presenter, Tony Muse. My name is Alex Perney. I actually am standing in for my colleague Larissa today, who could not be with us, that had actually brought in Tony to give this presentation. So if some of you were looking for Larissa's insight on this, I do apologize, but I can certainly answer any of the questions just as well with regard to self-direction and its relation to what Tony will be covering today. If you have any questions related to either of our respective services, please feel free to reach out directly. Again, my name is Alex Perney. My contact information is right there, and Tony's contact information is directly below. This contact information will also be repeated at the end of the presentation when we have a Q&A. So if you don't jot it down now, feel free to grab it from the end of the presentation as well, so you won't miss out. Before we get started, we do have to give out our required legal disclaimer. Advanta IRA and our employees, we do not provide any tax, legal, or investment advice, nor do we endorse or promote any investment products. All information and materials provided today are for educational purposes only, and all parties are encouraged to consult with their attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors before entering into any type of investment. So what is a self-directed IRA? To preface this a little bit, I know most of you are probably going to be familiar with what that is, but it's always good to kind of get a good baseline before we jump into the slightly more in-depth presentation that Tony's going to be putting out for us today. A self-directed IRA is a type of IRA that can acquire real estate, hold mortgages, notes, private placements, precious metals, and invest in a lot of different things that traditional custodians will not allow. Essentially, every IRA in its DNA is the exact same type of account. The primary difference is going to be in what the custodian is willing and able to hold for them. So here at Advanta, we specialize in alternative assets such as real estate, people flipping houses, people developing properties, and things that are going to be much more tangible in nature than things such as stocks and bonds. So it really just refers to the ability of the IRA owner to take control over the investments and be able to invest in what they know and understand. And really, that's about it I have for the preface to this presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Tony right now. Now, again, if anyone has any questions for either of us, please make sure that you do type those questions in, as everyone's audio has been muted, and we will address those as they come up. Tony, before you get started, let me just open up the question box on my end, so that way you can just go.
All right, absolutely. Just let me know when you
Sure, yeah.
done that, and I'll go ahead and dive in.
Why is this not popping out? Well, in either regard, the mouse just might swipe over, but you can go ahead and take it away.
Okay, fantastic. First of all, I want to go ahead and thank Alex and Larissa with Advanta for inviting me to come and speak with all of you today. I'm looking forward to this presentation, and as Alex touched upon, if you guys do have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box. If there's any specific questions that come up as we go along, you're welcome to reach out to me afterwards, and I do encourage anyone to reach out to Advanta with any questions they have on Advanta services or any specifics related to the presentation. Part of my goal and objective, just my own legal disclaimer, the purpose of this presentation is for informational purposes. So if you do have questions, it's ideal that you contact your CPA or tax advisor, your attorney, or feel free to reach out to our company where we can give you further information. And ultimately, we'd like to use this as a platform for going more in depth on what we're going to talk about if you're interested. So I do encourage everyone to give Advanta a lot of feedback as to what you got or what you'd like to see touched upon more from this presentation. So with that said, I'm going to dive right in, and to be tied up today's presentation is opportunities in real estate development. What is real estate development in the development life cycle? Now, a little about myself so that you briefly know, who I am and what I bring to the table. I've been investing in real estate since 2003. And I've actually been active full-time in real estate investing and development since 2006. I worked for one of the top real estate developing consulting companies in New York City for several years. Some of the projects that I worked on, which are currently under construction, include the Hudson Yards development, which is currently considered one of the largest development projects, not only in New York City, but in the world, with a total valuation of about $25 billion in development aspects, as well as several other large multi-billion-dollar mixed-use development projects throughout New York City. I've been involved in several hundred single-family home renovation projects, as well as apartment building renovations and ground-up apartment building development. So I've seen many different aspects of development, which I hope to touch upon. Now, Alex, I do notice for some reason I'm not able to move forward on the slides. Are you able to
Let me just
help me with that?
yeah, sure. Let me just see what we got. All right. Okay, attendees. You should have the full ability, because I can change it on my end.
Okay, yeah, we didn't have this challenge the other day. If you want to go ahead and just advance the slide for me for now.
1 second. I think I can bring us into a view that will work. I had to do this the other day, so we'll
Okay.
put it in the reading view. We will show just that screen. And then now all you need to do, Tony, see that little thing down at the bottom? Just click that and it will advance for you.
Perfect. Okay, there we go.
Great.
All right, great. All right, so the first thing that I find when talking with people about real estate development is the first question that comes up is, what exactly is real estate development, or what is property development? And my company very heavily surveys people, both clients that we deal with as well as people in the broader public. And typically what I find is, when it comes to real estate development or property development, most people simply think of having a plot of land one day, and then a short time later there is a building, whether that be a single family home or an apartment complex or an office tower, or that sort of thing. So where we want to start is actually defining what is real estate development or what is property development. So real estate development or property development consists of or encompasses all of the actions, activities, or processes that are involved with any of the 7 phases of the development life cycle that involve taking a parcel from raw land all the way through to having a completed operating structure on it, right? Whether that be a retail facility, an office tower, an apartment complex, or a single family home, etc. And the eventual redevelopment of existing or previously existing physical structures. Now we're going to break this down very quickly into the 7 phases. I'm just going to name them out for you, and then we're going to go into each one quickly and go from there. All right, so the first phase or stage of development is actually land acquisition. The second is land entitlement. The third would be land development. The fourth one would be building or vertical development. The fifth is building operations. The sixth would be building renovations. And then the final stage or phase of development would be property redevelopment. All right, now again, I'm going to break these down further for us so that we can get a little more understanding and depth on each one of these. All right, so the first phase, land acquisition, this can take several forms, but ultimately one has to acquire or come into possession of a piece of property which they intend to develop. Now, this can occur in the form of, a piece of property or parcel just being passed down through the family line, through the generations, or it could be someone going out and actually finding a site or several sites that they want to develop or build something on, and then they purchase or acquire on that property. Now, a key component in this aspect or phase of development is something known as or called land assemblage, which is the process where a developer will acquire several parcels, generally in a certain area, and then will seek to combine them and develop them. A very common example that's used in my neck of the woods, because I'm in Clearwater, Florida, in the Tampa Bay area. We're not that far of a drive from Orlando, Florida. And in the 50s, the Walt Disney Corporation used many different types of trusts and went around and bought up hundreds of individual parcels of land. And then they assembled them into one giant parcel, which they then were able to develop what is now their various theme parks upon. Right? They did that because if people knew that Disney, quote unquote, was buying up the land, they would have raised the price of it, right? But that's a common example of land assemblage. The developer acquires numerous parcels, puts them all together, and then makes one big development on that piece of land. Another example, which is current for a project I'm currently working on, that's more of the generational side, is I have a group I'm working with where several members of a family have a piece of land that's been passed down through several generations of their family, and some of the members have decided to sell their portion. Several members have decided they're going to hold on to their portion, right? But we would simply purchase or acquire the developable portion, and then we're going to move into the next phase, which we'll talk about, which is land entitlement, and we're actually actively involved in that now, right? So I've also got another example here, which is a much larger example, but one many people may be familiar with or may have studied in school, which is one of the most recognizable examples of land acquisition was the U.S. government's execution of the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, in the early 1800s, right? Many of us studied this in school. What actually occurred was the President Jefferson sent his agents, which happened to be James Monroe and Robert Livingston, to meet with the French government, Napoleon, and they were interested in purchasing New Orleans. Now, New Orleans, if you can see on the map, was not just the city or the town of New Orleans, but was actually a broader chunk of the country in that area at that time. And during the course of negotiations, the representatives for the U.S. were given a budget of $10 million to purchase the piece of property, and they kind of overstepped their bounds a little bit. They said, well, hey, what if we just purchased all of Louisiana? How much would you sell it for? And Napoleon came back and said, we'd sell it for $15 million. Now the Jefferson's agents went ahead and made that agreement and made that purchase. And even though they weren't authorized to do so, when they came back and informed Mr. Jefferson that they had essentially doubled the size of the country for just a little bit more than what they had been approved for, he was not upset or displeased at all and did not complain. And I would think that most Americans would agree that that was a very viable investment. And there are many examples of land acquisition or land development that are very similar, where people will begin negotiating and acquire additional land. And this is also a great example of a land assemblage type project as well. All right, so moving on, the second phase of development actually involves what's called land entitlement, and then you begin to move into the subject of zoning. So land entitlement is where you actually approach whichever branch of the government. In some cases, it could be the city officials. In some cases, it can be the county. And in some projects, or in some cases, you do have to deal with the state. And you essentially receive the legal approval or legal authorization to engage in your development, right? Now, there's several considerations that enter in this phase or aspect of development, which is zoning. Zoning is a process and involves a set of laws that are exercised by the local municipality that divide different lands into different zones or different categories of usage. Entitlement itself consists of actual gaining the approval or the authority from whichever government entity oversees that parcel or that property, and they give you the approval to develop that which you wish to develop on that site. Okay, an example of this would be if an area is zoned for commercial property, you can't build, as a single-family home community. Likewise, if something is zoned for agricultural use, generally the county or the state won't allow you to come and build, say, an airport, or vice versa. If you've got an area that's designated for manufacturing and for industrial purposes, they wouldn't let you come and build a strip mall or a shopping center, that sort of thing. So this is where both your entitlements and your zoning become very important. Now, many of us hear from time to time about instances of a parcel being rezoned, or where the entitlement, the land usage and purposes is approved for a change. And then, in the example I gave of my company dealing with members of the family, we're actually involved in this phase of the project as well, right? The parcel of land that we're dealing with is currently zoned agricultural, and we've approached the county and are working with and negotiating with them to have that parcel rezoned for residential development, right? So this is a very common occurrence, right?
So Tony, I got a quick question for you. I think people might be interested in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So when it comes to rezoning and changing land entitlements, maybe you can delve a little bit deeper into how complicated of a process and that. How long does it typically take? And is there like a success or failure rate that you see more often than not than from like going from one thing to another? Like, for instance, agricultural to residential is probably pretty easy, but going from something like residential to mixed use to residential to industrial, are there ones that are harder than others? And maybe give an example of an issue and a roadblock that you've overcome.
Sure. Okay, there's a lot there, so let me break it down, if that's okay for everyone. So first off, I don't have specific statistics I can rattle off right now, as it wasn't necessarily part of this presentation to touch upon, say, success rates or timelines. What I can say is this: first of all, the timelines will vary by area and by the project itself. And there can be several reasons for that. Number one, it can depend on who exactly you're dealing with, meaning whether you're dealing with just the county or just the city, or whether you're dealing with multiple authorities. And it can also, the kind of overriding factors can also be, as you touched upon, what is the change that you're trying to make? And then how desirable is that for the local area? And let me give a more specific example to help make that more clear. There's a specific project that my team and I were working on recently in the Daytona, Florida area. And for the particular parcel that we were looking at developing, the parcel was a beachfront piece of land. So for that particular parcel, both the city, the county, and the state each had to be involved in reviewing and approving our entitlement as well as our development plan. Now we'll get into when we reach the next phases, I'll talk a little bit more about the development plans, right? But a project like that where there's multiple governmental authorities involved, there's going to be more time to obtain an approval than if we were just dealing with, say, the city, right?
Sure.
So that's one of those factors where there isn't necessarily a cookie cutter answer to say, well, it should typically take 3 months or it should typically take 6 months. It will depend on your particular project and some of the nuances of the project, as well as who you have to interact with. Now, another example using the same project, the city, which that parcel of land resided in, they were very pro-development, and they were very pro-development for the specific project and specific site that we were seeking our approvals for. So that actually aided us in, number one, being able to negotiate with the city, the county, and the state to get the necessary entitlements for our project. It also helped when it came time for doing public hearings, which I believe on that project we were able to avoid, right? That can be a factor as part of this phase that can affect timelines as well as affect the success rate. In some instances, let's say you want to convert a parcel of land from agricultural to, as you said, to allow for a mixed use development. Well, in some areas, there is a public hearing process that needs to be done where as the developer, you would go to, let's say, the county, you would present your plan, and the county says, well, we need to have a public hearing, and we need to allow the members of the community to come and voice any questions, any concerns, any objections, and then the city council or the county board members, they will look at both sides, take everything under review and consideration, and then make a final determination as to whether or not they're going to approve your project and grant you the entitlement and allow you to move forward or not. If you have to have a public hearing, there's typically additional time involved with that process because it is its own process than if you were able to simply go to the county and sign a couple of forms and then have them approve the conversion right away. And that I've seen seen and been through both aspects of those. So that's something where the timelines for that process can also vary depending on the area or the location of your project, as well as the size and the scope of the project. I have seen some instances where you don't need a public hearing. I've seen instances where you need a public hearing and it can be a very fast process and be done in anywhere from 1 to 6 months. And then I've seen instances where because, let's say, there's violent opposition from members of the community, I've seen where sometimes that process can take several years and a person may or may not be given the approval or the entitlement that they were seeking. And I have, while I haven't necessarily personally been involved in all three, I have been involved in some way, shape, or form with all three. So those can be some of the variables that do affect the question in terms of what is the timeline and what's the success rate. So what would be ideal is if you have a project in mind, I would find, and there are specialists, the company I initially started out working for in development, we were consultants that focused on those types of projects specifically. And I would work with someone who's expert for your area who can guide you through what's needed and help make that process as smooth as possible. All right. So if that's covers it, I'd like to move on to
Yeah,
the
go
next
ahead.
slide. Okay, perfect. So basically, once you have gained your entitlement and you know are essentially seeking to build a project that conforms to the approved zoning, then you move into the third phase, which is the land development phase of development. Now land development simply it's kind of like preparing the land, right? The first thing that someone's going to go in and do is they're going to clear the land, meaning they're going to knock down any bushes and shrubs. In some cases, they're going to knock down trees. In some cases, and this depends on the local guidelines, trees are going to be protected and preserved or relocated, right? So those aspects depend on the local area. But basically, you're going to go in and prep the land. And this is where, if we use a housing community as an example, many of us have probably seen where there was this broad stretch of land, and then we see someone go in and knock down trees and kind of level the land, and then they start to build a road. They're also going to be adding utility infrastructure, running, power lines and telephone lines and cable lines and fiber optic internet lines. They're going to be installing sewer and water systems, and then they're going to put in a road. And the land is essentially being prepped for a vertical structure to be built out of it. So all of the aspects and nuances of that activity constitute the land development. And the best way to think of it is just thinking of, the land is being prepared for some vertical structure to be placed upon it, whether that be a single family home or an office building or a condo tower or, retail facility, etc. Once that aspect or phase of development is complete, that's where you move into your actual vertical development or your building development. And this is simply, you go in, the land has been prepped, so now you build your foundation, and then you start to build up and build whatever it is that you're building. Again, that's, whether it's a single family home that's one or more stories, whether it's an office tower that's could be anywhere from 1 to, hundreds of stories, whether it be, a hospital, a manufacturing facility, etc. It's just this phase constitutes, all of the construction aspects related to building your vertical structure. All right. Now, once your vertical structure is completed, then you move into building operations. So whatever that structure is, whether it's a single family home, whether it's a office building, whether it's a retail facility, you then move into building operations. This is typically the longest aspect or phase of what we could call development, because it's the period during which the structure that has been built is simply being used and operated for whatever purpose it was created, right? Whether that's a retail facility, which purpose is to house a commercial enterprise that's going to sell products and deliver services, or whether it's a single family home that's going to allow a family to live there and use and operate that space, right? Each of these structures have their own kind of lifetime, their own expected usage, but the occupying period is what's considered part of building operations. Now, moving on from there, over time, we all know and understand that, buildings, have to be maintained and or they begin to deteriorate. An example, if we use a single family home example or a residential property example, the typical expected lifetime for most residential properties, whether that be an apartment tower or a single family home, is about 40 years. Now, as you start to approach the end of that term, right? So we could look at it as the operating period for that structure is about 40 years. As you get towards the end of that term, then you begin to move toward the next phase, which is the building renovations. During this phase, people start to do more extensive upgrades or renovations to the structure. They start to do additions. They start to do major overhauls to the systems and structures. For example, they may have to fully update the electrical system. They may have to fully update the HVAC system. They may have to redo the plumbing entirely. These are all aspects of building renovations, right? That process can vary in terms of its timeline, as well as, and it will depend on, the type of structure and the intended use or purpose of that structure, as well as what the owner is trying to accomplish with that structure. When the renovations phase starts to break down, that's where typically we move into property redevelopment. Property redevelopment, which is one of the more well-known aspects of property development, is where you simply look at, completely removing or scrapping the existing structure and starting with something brand new. And I'll dive into a couple specific examples here. Here we go. So hopefully you can see on this screen here. This, believe it or not, I actually selected the home that I grew up in. So this home is just outside, or was just outside of the Washington, D.C. metro area, about 10 to 15 minutes outside of downtown D.C. And the picture on the right shows a home which was a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, approximately 1,000 square foot home that was built in the mid 1940s. I believe it was about 1947, but somewhere between 1945 and 1950 was when the home was built, right? This was a typical home for the time period or for the era, with the most modern features and amenities for the area. Then in the early 2000s, so it happened to be about 50 years beyond its lifetime, right? The home went through its expected lifetime. There was an extensive amount of renovations for several years. That process broke down, and then a local developer came in. They bought the land. They removed the existing structure, and then they newly constructed this property that you see on the right side of the screen, which happened to be a 2-story, approximately 4,000 square foot home. Right, so you went from a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, 1,000 square foot property to an approximately 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom, 3,000 square foot property, right? So one of the aspects of redevelopment involves what's called the highest and best use, or the utilization of the space or the property. So sometimes redevelopment can be done also because a person is seeking to maximize their ability to utilize the underlying land or the space. And that's part of what occurred here, as well as the fact that this particular residential property had gone through its useful lifetime. And good. And then of course we couldn't talk about redevelopment without talking about some of our larger cities like New York or Chicago, which are iconic for redevelopment. And so we have here an example from New York City. This was a recent example I found where the Metro Transit Authority, the MTA, who manages and runs the subway system in New York. They had this particular property that is shown on the right, which housed their, I believe it was their power plant. The city actually sold this property to a local developer for $1, under the agreement that the developer would build the building that you see a rendering of on the left, which is a 23-story, 150,000 square foot residential tower consisting of 171 apartments. And part of the agreement, how the developer was able to get the building for $1 is they agreed that they would allow 68 of the units to be affordable or subsidized housing units, right? But to understand the concept of redevelopment and this aspect of redevelopment, you've basically got this deteriorated, falling down building that's in a very prime spot of land within New York City. This parcel happens to be just off Central Park on the Upper West Side, and the developer was able to approach the city and say, hey, we'll tear down this building, we're going to build a new high-rise tower, we're going to have something that's current and that's going to generate revenue for the city through property taxes, allow us to redevelop and to improve the utilization of this parcel of land. And they were able to get that approved. And so that's a typical example of property redevelopment. And now I do want to throw out at the end of this presentation, because you guys are probably noticing there's quite a bit of information in these slides, and I'm kind of giving the quick overview, but there is more information here. Feel free to reach out to myself or Alex if you would like to receive a copy of these slides. I'm happy to send them to anyone so you can read through them and answer questions. But I am going to jump to the next phase of our talk here. Alex, if you don't mind just keeping me updated on how we're doing on time.
Oh, you're perfectly fine. I mean, I normally block out the whole hour, so I mean, we got a solid another 20 minutes left. So,
fantastic.
Yeah, just
okay,
keep firing away.
Great, because I do want to dive into the next phase here. Now we've roughly and very quickly covered the 7 different phases of development. But what I want to touch upon now is throughout all of the 7 phases, there are some common elements or some common actions or activities that you're going to engage in, or that certain professions will engage in, regardless of which phase of development they focus on. And then I'll circle back around and help you guys understand the difference between a developer and certain types of specialists. Following the same format, I'm just going to run through a couple of topics here, and then we're going to look at each one a little more in depth. All right, so regardless of what phase of development you operate in, you're always going to go through an acquisition process. You're always going to have a market analysis or strategy that you're going to come up with. There's always going to be environmental factors or environmental considerations that you're going to look at. You're always going to be dealing with financing or looking at how to structure the financials of the project. You're going to be dealing with approval and permitting. Again, that's interacting with the city, the state, the county level, or it could even be dealing with an HOA board or that sort of thing. But there's always going to be an approval and permitting process that will be gone through. You're always going to deal with improvements, which deals with building and construction matters. You're going to have logistics considerations, right? How do you transport people to and from your site and allow accessibility to and from the site and within the site? And then you're always going to want to look at and take into account what is your sales or disposition, or what you would call the liquidation strategy. Or another way of describing it is, if you're operating in one phase, you always want to understand which phases of development come before your project and which come after, because you're going to try to transition your project through its own phase of development and then transition it to someone operating in the next phase. And I'll touch upon that a little more as we dive into these a little more in depth. All right. So when it comes to acquisition, acquisition tasks can be broken down into 5 categories. These are feasibility studies, underwriting requirements, contract negotiations, due diligence, and then closing considerations. Again, whether you're looking at a project for a property redevelopment, or you're looking to acquire a raw piece of land, or whether you're gonna, buy a piece of land which has been prepped for vertical development and you're gonna build the vertical structure, or any one of the 7 phases, the first thing you're gonna have to do is take your project and look at its feasibility. You're going to have to anticipate, you're going to look at, do the anticipated future benefits of building or developing out this site or doing this project, do they exceed the current and future expected costs, right? That's going to help you determine if you have a viable project or not. The next thing that you're going to look at is you're going to actually do an underwriting activity. You're gonna, determine if you can attract capital for your specific development that's gonna allow you to make a reasonable profit, to allow a reasonable return for the either the bank you're working with or the private investors you're working with, or the investment group, wherever your money is being sourced from. Are the risks and are the returns balanced? And do they allow for you as a developer to make an appropriate level of profit, as well as account for, the potential risks or associated risks with the development? Once you've isolated those things, then you're going to look into aspects of the contracts, right? How's title currently controlled on that project? How are you going to obtain title? What type of title are you going to sell the project with? What are the associated risks with buying the property and selling the property? Now, to give a more detailed example, I mentioned earlier that I've been involved in several hundred single-family home flips. One of the companies that I was partners in for several years, we would acquire large blocks of single-family homes from banking entities that we worked with, which they were essentially bank REOs, or real estate owned, for anyone who doesn't know the REO term. So for this aspect of the acquisition, most of the properties that we were acquiring with what's called a quitclaim deed or a quitclaim title. And so there were things that we had to research and look into, and certain considerations or risks associated with buying the property with that type of title, as opposed to what's called a warranty deed. And then one of the first things that we would do is we would put the property through a legal process to convert the title into a warranty deed, because that enhanced what we could sell or liquidate the property for, right? But looking at those types of considerations or factors is all something that falls under both the contract, the underwriting, and the due diligence aspects of the acquisition. And there are things that you want to always make sure that you're looking at beforehand. Whenever me or my team do a project, we look at the entire thing and analyze the entire thing all the way through before we go under contract or before we acquire a parcel, because you don't want to put yourself in a position where you think you were buying one thing, but because you didn't thoroughly get all your ducks in a row, so to speak, by the time you closed on the property, you found you purchased something else. So from there, you move into due diligence. A lot of what I've talked about is, you acquire the data or information during due diligence, but due diligence really involves looking at what are the assumptions about development, and have they been verified as valid, correct, and appropriate. And you can have both legal considerations, you can have physical considerations, economic considerations, and market considerations. The example I just gave with the deed, that would be a legal consideration that would fall under your due diligence examination. Physical would be, have you gone out to and inspected the property or inspected the site, depending on, which aspect of development you're working in or which phase you're working in. have you looked at the physical structure or the physical site and determined what needs to be done to it to have your project come off? And then market and economic are very similar but different. Economic would be all of the financial aspects related to the project, as well as it incorporates market factors such as what is the current market, what are current interest rates, where do market participants anticipate the market's going to go over the next, say, 6 months, 3 years, 5 years, whatever your timeline is. And those timelines can vary. Earlier, I mentioned being involved in Hudson Yards redevelopment project in New York City. Some of you would probably be surprised to hear that a lot of what is being constructed or what is being built right now, the negotiations for those buildings actually occurred between 2006 and 2010. So, so if we had been analyzing the market and trying to figure out where's the market going to go over the next 1 to 2 years, at that time, right, we wouldn't have predicted the right information for something that's being constructed now 10 years down the road. So you've got to look at your timeline and your market factors. And some larger development projects, it's not uncommon to have several years of negotiations to receive your entitlement, and then several years of construction. Several projects I work on now have a 2 to 5 year timeline just for the construction. Some projects I work on have a 2 to 3 month timeline, right? But in either case, you've got to look at the timeline of your project and then your what the market factors or implications might be based on how that'll impact your specific project. Okay, once you've done all that, then you move into closing, where you'll look at, do you have all the required conditions been met for you to close on the property as expected and as anticipated. And once you've got that out of the way, then you'll complete your acquisition. Now I'm going to speed up here a little quickly so I can cover everything. But next, again, regardless which phase you're operating in, you're going to do a market analysis and come up with a marketing strategy, right? You're going to have to research and analyze current market conditions, pricing, demand for the particular product or project you're working on. You're going to have to look at future market trends and also strategies for how you're going to promote whatever parcel it is you're developing, right? If you're developing a single family home project, how are you going to promote that housing community? Or if it's an apartment, how are you going to promote that building and get those units rented, etc. So these are all things that, regardless of what phase you're operating in, you're always going to have market analysis and then marketing strategy that you're going to have to work out for your project. Similarly, environmental factors or considerations include an assessment of past, present, and future environmental conditions of the site and the surrounding areas. You're also going to have to look at how does your development affect the broader environment. And these are things that are also often going to be requested from the various governmental authorities that you're going to be dealing with to get an approval for your site. It's very common that in order to get approval to build an office tower or to build a single family home community, that the county will want an environmental impact study done before they will grant you an approval. And that these aspects apply no matter which aspect or phase of development you're dealing with. All right, next is financing. Again, this is where you're going to go more in detail or more in depth on your financial projections and your considerations. You're going to analyze your timeframes. You're going to analyze interest rates and costs of capital. How much capital do you need to bring to the table? What kind of contingency budget do you have? What kind of construction budget do you have? All of the various financial projections that are needed for your project start to finish are going to fall in here. And no matter which phase of development you're in, there's always going to be financing considerations to look at. Approval and permitting. So every phase of development is going to have specific approvals or permits that are needed to operate, improve, or modify a site, or to allow you to be able to do whatever it is that you're trying to do with your particular project. Now, depending on the project and depending on which phase you're operating in, that's going to adjust who you need to interact or deal with. If you're trying to do an addition to your single family home, which per our categories kind of falls under, phase 6, building renovations, you're probably just going to go to the county and get a permit or get approval to have a licensed contractor do your addition. But if you are trying to take, let's say, a 500-acre land site and you want to build a single family housing community with several hundred homes in it, well, now you're probably going to have to deal with the state. You're going to have to deal with the county. You may have to deal with a local or a regional body. And in some cases, depending on its location, you may have to be involved with federal agencies. Again, tied into making sure you care for the environment, you care for the land, you handle infrastructure considerations, etc. So this is going to vary based on your project, right? But you'll always have some sort of approval and permitting that you're going to have to deal with. Improvements deals with building and construction, and this is just determining what are the planned, design, engineered, and construction aspects of your project, and making sure that you've got everything, all your ducks in a row, so to speak, so that you can build your approved plan and design, and that it also is something desirable and conforms with the local area and what people want. All right, and then logistics. There's always going to be logistics considerations in terms of how do you transport or move people to and from your site, and then how do you transport and move people around your site. Now, this can sometimes be very simple if you're dealing with like a single family home community, right? Your plan would include, the roads into and out of the community that you're going to build, and then the driveway to and from the single family home, right? Or if you're dealing with a larger site, for example, going back to Hudson Yards, some of the logistics considerations that we had to take into account with that involved how we plan to add to, improve, and utilize existing city infrastructure and the impact on the subway system, the local road system, and walking systems to get people both to and from the site, as well as to transport people around within the site. So depending on the size and scope of your project, this is going to vary, but all of the considerations associated with moving people to and from the location and then moving them around the location are incorporated in the logistics aspects of the development. Okay, and then ultimately you've got sales and disposition. You've got to look at what is my exit strategy for this particular project or this particular parcel, right? And there's due diligence that has to be done in advance so that when you arrive at that point, you're able to provide proper seller's disclosures. You're able to properly market your property. You're able to effectively negotiate and execute a viable sale. You're able to negotiate any residual development agreements that may occur. For anyone who's new, what this means is there's a condo development my team and I were involved in where we were building a 12-unit condo building, and the site allowed for, it was a waterfront site, and it allowed for up to 6 boat docks. So there's 12 residential units, but there's 6 boat docks. So part of the considerations were, when the building was completed and was turned over to the condo association management, well, the developer was retaining ownership of the docks, and then they would be available for lease to residents who wanted to lease a boat dock, right? Obviously, it'd be nice to have your waterfront condo and to be able to, walk right out the back to your dock, and jump on your boat and cruise away. But unfortunately, there were 12 units and 6 docks. Well, part of all of those negotiations were, who's going to own the dock? Is it going to be the condo association or the developer? What are the nuances of that? So those are things that can be part of the residual development agreements as part of your project, and you want to look at those things. Again, you want to consider all aspects of the project in advance, and you want to make it a win-win, right? As you move your project from one phase of development to another, you want to set up and structure your project so that whoever is purchasing or acquiring your project, or whoever is taking over the next phase of development, there's some profit potential for them, and they're able to make money and have a win. So these are all things that I consider under, seller due diligence, seller disclosure type things, and part of executing a successful or viable sale. I always structure my projects so that whoever's acquiring it has some profit potential. That helps me have a viable exit strategy, and it's very, very important. All right. Now I know we covered it a little bit fast, but there's a key element I want to point out here. So developers tend to work through a list of actions or tasks that comprise all of the common elements within a specific phase of development. So if you start to look at some of the more known developers out there, they tend to be recognized and known for operating within one of the 7 phases of development. They become known as, the go-to company for, redevelopment, or they become known as the go-to company for vertical development, or they become known as, the go-to company for a land development project. Whereas a professional, your architect, your engineer, your contractor, whether that be a general contractor, plumber, electrician, they work across all phases of development and provide services that allow any of those phases of development to complete their specific function, whether it's architectural or engineering, etc., so that the project can be moved from one phase of development to the other. So this helps point out how these different bodies or groups of people, how they work together and align, but also how they're separate. And it's something vital to understand. Now, the relevant importance or priority of tasks to be completed in each phase is going to vary with the team of specialists that you have. And then each phase of development has its own risks, rewards, expenses, and profit potential or profit centers, right? We're out of time here, but ultimately what I would like everyone to take away from this is that, this aspect of developers tend to focus on a specific phase, or in some cases, several aligned phases of development. And then professionals, the architects, the engineers, they work across the phases to provide services. And if you want to become involved in property development, whether it's as a private investor or as an active developer or that sort of thing, it's vital to understand all of these phases, how they flow from one to another, and then how the members of your team, whether it be your architect, your engineer, your contractor, how they allow your project to be moved from one phase to another. Because again, at the end of the day, whether you're operating in a specific phase of development or you're a professional providing support services to companies in various phases of development, we want to work together so that everyone involved in a project is able to move the project from one phase to the next. They're able to capitalize on the various profit centers of that project and that phase of its development life cycle, and where we're able to create opportunities for everyone to participate and for everyone to win or receive benefit from, being involved in the project. Let me just see here. All right, I had some further examples of each of the various items here, but because we're kind of approaching the end of the hour, I kind of touched upon, the summary here. I would love to spend more time with anyone and answer questions one-on-one, or I would love to come back and talk a little bit more in depth on one or more of the phases of development if anyone's interested. So again, I'd say, reach out to Advanta or feel free to reach out to me. And I would love to hear feedback on the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, for the great content today. I don't see any questions popping up, and we are hitting right on 1 o'clock. We'll stick around here for a minute. I'll keep an eye on the total number of attendees that we still have. So yeah, we'll stick around here for a minute. Again, anyone that has any questions, feel free to type them in. I do see someone raise their hand. You do need to type that question in so we can get it answered because your audio is muted.
Great, perfect. Yeah, and I would love to answer questions if anyone wants, and or anyone can reach out to me directly, or like I said, I encourage everyone to send feedback to Alex and or Advanta as to what you thought about the presentation, and or if you would like to have me cover any one of these phases more in depth. Because I'd love to work with Advanta to go over this for you guys more in depth as well.
Okay, Darla, let's see. Yeah, we'll email the link to everything so you can review everything on our YouTube. We won't necessarily compile it to a PDF. Let's see. With regards to potential investment options, we would ask that we keep that kind of removed from this presentation. But if you are curious, give Tony a call. I'm sure he can kind of go through that with you if there are any opportunities and things like that. So I'd encourage you to reach out to him directly. His contact information, phone number 818-649-9011, or info@expansionpropertiesint.com. So feel free to reach out to him directly if you have questions pertaining to actually investing and the like.
Yeah, perfect. And Alex, if it's okay, I'll just throw out there one more time for anyone who may have missed it or anyone who's interested. As I said, we did run through this kind of fast. This was intended to be a broad overview, so there was more information on the slides than what I was able to fully read off. So if any of you would like to receive the slide presentation from today and maybe spend some time with it and review and learn a little further, feel free to reach out to me at the phone number or email provided as well, and I would be happy to send along the slides. You can look over them at your leisure, and then if you have questions or want to find out more from there, you're always welcome to reach out to me as well.
Yeah, sounds great. Looks like we have most of the people starting to drop off here, so we'll get you out of here, Tony. Get you back to your day. Again, anyone else that has any questions, feel free to reach out to Tony directly, or if you do have any questions with regards to this kind of stuff in a self-directed account, I am also available to answer any questions that you may have. Just want to put this last one up here so it makes it onto the YouTube for both of our contact information. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and especially Tony, thank you for being a part of our educational series. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it as well, Alex. Thank you guys for inviting me, and I hope to talk in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks. Everyone have a great day.